Okay, this is another episode of Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this one is going to be FNS, formerly of CLG and TSM, and Complexity, I think, wasn't it for like a week or something like that? So he's been around, he's been in a few different teams. So let's start, okay, because obviously the context of this interview, in case someone's looking back from the future, is the team that was CLG's CSGO team was just released, and it was announced that actually, as of now, CLG is probably departing from CSGO entirely. So before we get into all the details about the current team that you had and the leaving the org, etc., I actually wanted to just ask this initially. Since you are someone who was in CLG on two different occasions, and in fact, the first time you became a proper, top salaried professional, when obviously you were in the Mouse Spaz team, which became CLG, which then went to the MLG X Games Aspen. First game, you had this big upset in, and then everyone knows the story since then.
Yeah.
When you were first in CLG, were things different from how they were the second time? Like, was the squad in complete control of everything that they did? Did you have all the power as the in-game leader? Did you have a lot of say? What was it like the first time around?
So in the beginning, once we first signed our contracts, went to Aspen, all that stuff, we immediately got off to the wrong foot because we had other offers from one of the teams was Envious that I can think of, and then we had two more. And
I mean, for context, I'll just say this, right? Actually, I remember, a lot of people might remember the timeline was that at that tournament, LDLC won, who was the top French team, and Dignitas, who was the top Danish team, came third. And right after this event was when they both signed with Envious and TSM. And I know actually at that event, like the guy from Team Liquid was there, the guy Reginald from TSM was there, obviously Hastro from Envy. All these people were looking for CSGO teams, right? So that you had more offers, right?
Yeah, so it was the Envious is the only one that I could think of. I'm not gonna just randomly name names that might have not offered us, but Envious is one of them. We were really looking into them, and so we got onto a call with Hastro, and he was like a really chill guy, and he was like basically selling himself to us. Like Envious was already pretty big in Call of Duty, I think, at the time, and
yes,
I wasn't much of a fan of Call of Duty, and neither were any of my teammates, so we didn't really know much about the org. Whereas CLG, a lot of my teammates used to play League of Legends, so we knew what about CLG basically. So we knew CLG a little bit more. So we were leaning towards CLG, but then Envious gave us a really good offer. And so we brought that offer to CLG, and CLG essentially just gave us like $1,000 extra, like all of us, to sign with them. So we went back to Envious with that offer and just to see if they would like raise it. And they said, no, we can't do that. Sorry. And so basically because of the offer that CLG gave us initially, and they already sent us the contract and everything, yes. We basically said, okay, cool. Like we're going to sign with CLG. So we said no to every other org including Envious, that really, really wanted us. Basically, we said, no, we're good. We're signing with CLG. So they sent us the contract. We signed them, sent them back. And then a week later, Hotshot gets on a call with us and says, yeah, we can't pay you that amount. That was a mistake. And it really just we just got off on the wrong foot like that because we'd already said no to every other org, right? So there's nobody who wants us anymore. Yes. So at that point, we have to sign with CLG, even if they want to give us $10 a month. So basically, that was kind of something we never expected from a professional organization, to make mistakes like that. And I don't think that they deliberately did it. I really do think that was a misunderstanding. But they gave us a figure. We signed the contract, sent it back to them with that exact figure, and then they sent us new contracts saying, yeah, we're not going to be able to give you that amount of money. That was a misunderstanding. Okay. So we'd already gotten off on the wrong foot there. But as far as CLG, like this time around to before, well, the first time, I don't think we had as much control as people may have thought. As far as our team went, like things that happened on our team, we never wanted to make any replacements or anything like that. We were never into doing that type of stuff. We were the type of team that would want to stay together regardless of whether we're going through tough times or not. So we stuck together for a little bit with Peter. And then I think the first change we ever made under that roster was PTR.
Yes.
And at that point, and that was like for reasons in and out of game, and CLG gave us full control to make that decision. They were like, you know what, if you guys all agree that Peter needs to go, then sure, we'll, that's fine. We'll get another player. So then luckily JDM, the way the contracts worked then isn't the same that they work now. The buyouts weren't like insane, and yes. JDM was like a free agent. So I found JDM like an ESEA pug, and I was like, okay, like come play for us. So he played for us, and that was before we even picked up Peter. We played with JDM first. JDM quit our team. We picked up Peter, did well, cut Peter, then re-added JDM. And that's when I guess the team started doing really well. But as far as the org went, other than making sure that we were living in a gaming house, they didn't really force stuff on us that much.
Okay, from the outside, again, your team's one of the ones where I've never really had any, like, you know, friend that was an insider or anything. You know, I've known a little bit, like I talked to Tarek at some events and JDM when they were in the team. So I wouldn't claim to know anything from the inside, but as a pure outsider, things I'd heard within the community, I actually had heard about your team the first time around, that one of the reasons why some of the players kind of like some of the motivation got sapped, or they felt like, you know, the team wasn't going anywhere, was actually due to the fact that your timing of when you signed those first contracts, right? For you, it must have seemed great at the time because, you know, before that you were in Mousespaz, you were in a very small org that wasn't a bit, you had no history, you know, and you were getting to go to big lands, and your team obviously actually was starting to get like good in the game itself, and now you had a good org behind. So that sounds great, except if you knew what would happen in the next 6 months to a year, which was that basically like every 3 months from the beginning of 2015 onwards, everyone in the world who was in a position to sign a new contract was getting all these mad pay bumps. And all of a sudden, every team, this is actually why the whole thing happened with TSM and their Danish squad, and they wanted to get put more. And then Fnatic was getting re-signed because they were like, you know, the best team in the world, but then they were getting paid like the 6th most money. And there was all these really weird kind of like not game related situations. And the thing that everyone always used to say about CLG was that you guys basically had locked yourself in to like a 2-year contract or something, but it was like one where, I mean, listen, I guess they could have done what like Fnatic did and said, well, we'll give you a new contract for no reason, which is, you know, that's very magnanimous of Fnatic, but no one's obliged to do that. You have signed a contract. Is this true that you guys were kind of like locked in and maybe were a bit naive, thinking like this is great to have 2 years? Because obviously the problem is at the time you sign it, you always think, well, of course I want long-term security, don't you?
Oh yeah, no, essentially that's exactly what happened. Like we were like, you know what? Like this is like a dream, you know, is to get paid to play CS. That was a dream of every player that played the game. So when we got the chance to do it, we jumped on it immediately. I would have freaking probably signed a 3-year contract, dude. Like I had no prior background in like contracts or negotiations or anything like that. So for me, I was like, you know what? Like I just want to play this game. You know, I don't care about the money. I don't care about that. But essentially, as time goes on, you start to see your value rise as a player, as a team, and that's what we didn't account for. You know what I mean? So. Yeah, I think a lot of teams made that mistake going into orgs the first time around, is they signed 2-year contracts and then they were basically stuck. And for players like JDM and Tarek who ended up on Liquid and Cloud9, which is essentially what teams want to go, like those are the teams the players really want to go to anyway. Yes. It was definitely like a lot harder for them to get out of the organization once they were locked in, especially because they were the best players on the team.
Okay, so I realize like there's a level to which, right, I'm never as like black and white as a lot of fans are. Like a lot of fans, for example, think to themselves like, how could Virtus Pro play badly when they get paid $25,000 a month? It's like that doesn't really work, you know. Like in the moment that you're practicing or you're playing in the game, you can't really be thinking about that. It's not a motivator in that sense, you know. But there will be times, especially if it's like a really, like, you know, you're going through tough times in the team, or maybe your own motivation was already waning. If you then also think in the back of your mind, like, this team over here who's either like at the same level or worse than us is getting paid more than us, and you know, then you think, oh, I'm still here for a year and a half at this point in time. Does that cause any problems within a team?
I mean, not necessarily, because honestly, the goal is usually to win anyway. But it's always in the back of your mind that, oh, I don't feel like I'm getting paid enough, or I'm not getting this, I'm not getting like what other teams are getting, and we're better than these teams, so I don't understand. And the only reason some of the teams were making more money than we were, even if we were better than them, was because we signed earlier, you know, and they were able to get us. So it was just like it's kind of our fault too. So it's really hard for us to fault necessarily the org. The organization got us; it was a steal for them, and we signed those contracts, so it's our responsibility. So there's very little you can do about it. But when you ask them for raises and stuff like that, organizations, especially an organization like CLG, who didn't essentially want to put any money into CS anyway, clearly, were very, very hesitant to want to pay players more money. Like, very hesitant.
So I actually know this is an incident where, funnily enough, through my own education from getting to know Reginald from TSM, I actually know that it's not even entirely irrational. Like, what happened was, when a lot of the League of Legends organizations like Team Liquid, TSM, CLG got into CSGO, was when CSGO, the game, was booming. So they actually did get a lot of their early teams and the early squads kind of a steal. You know, they were like, right, this is a reasonable price. I don't mind paying for this for a team that's, you know, whatever, 8th best, whatever it might be, you know. But the problem was, as the inflation happened with all the salaries, and especially in Europe where a lot of orgs came in where they had, you know, venture capital and stuff, and for whatever reason they just decided like it's not about making a profit now. The problem is some of these League of Legends orgs actually kind of prided themselves at the time on the idea that, like, you know, we're a business as well. Like, we're going to try and make money off this, and we're going to have great sponsors and pay them well. So I know that a lot of them, like, that's part of the reason why TSM let that Danish team go, is that they got partway through the year and they said to themselves, even if this is the best team in the world, like, I can't actually sort of pay the biggest salary anymore. Yeah, it's going to be kind of crazy. I'm kind of gambling here. With that said, though, like, it is different if you have arguably the best team. In CLG's case, right, obviously people have heard from outside, you've said it now, that they weren't really like committed to the idea of putting in more money, right? Mm-hmm. Has that been a reason why, if you look at the history of the CLG org, starting with this first CSGO team, basically good players have pretty much only left the team. Like, the best players have eventually gone to the other teams, and then they've gotten good players since, but they've been players where maybe CLG was a step up. They haven't really ever gotten like the big signing, you know, there's never been the big free agent or the big, like, you know, we've got the equivalent of a Tarek or a Mixwell or something. They've never really managed to do that. Is this part of it? Is it just not a destination for people?
It's a combination of two things. So number one is what you said, the fact that basically, well, the fact that organization doesn't want to put out the money in general to buy out players 50, 100K, which is completely understandable.
Did you guys actually get that though? Like, because here's the thing, I don't blame, for example, I know in fact the Danish CSGO players didn't get it just because they didn't know the business, you know, they just thought to themselves, well, if we're number one, we should get paid the most, you know. Did you guys understand in CLG that to a degree?
The fact that we should get paid more, you're saying?
Like, no, like, now I can see that you do sympathize on that level to a degree. That, you know,
did we understand it back then, you're saying?
Yeah. Did you guys have a sense of it back then?
Yeah, to some extent. It was very hard for, like, especially for me specifically. I would never go out and ask for a raise, especially for losing, you know? It was really hard for me to do that. Just, I didn't feel like I deserved it, number one, but also because I could see from the org's perspective why an organization like CLG isn't making their money back. And they were straight up with us about it. They were like, okay, like, think about this. You're asking us to pay you this amount of money, or you're asking us to put this amount of money into buying out a player or whatever. We're not going to make that money back, essentially. Yeah. And they were one thing they were is very transparent with us about that. So we sort of understood it from their perspective as well. It wasn't as much that, but like I said, it was two reasons. The fact that the organization wasn't willing to put out the money for the players, and also or raise salaries for the players that the star players of the team. And number two was the fact that nobody wanted to come to CLG. Like, we weren't the team people wanted to go to. The team people wanted to go to were Cloud9 and Liquid, because those teams were the best teams in North America. And that was probably one of a much bigger reason as to why teams or players didn't want to come to, or that's why players wanted to leave more so than come in, was because of the fact that, like, players like JDM and Tarek, CLG was a stepping stone team. It's really just that simple. And that's why a lot of my frustration built up because of that. It was the fact that as an in-game leader, it's really frustrating when you build a foundation, you put a ridiculous amount of hard work in, and then it just crumbles when a star player wants to leave, or players want you gone, or, you know, whatever else. But yeah.
Okay. Okay, I have one little side question on that topic though, because I do know that this is again very early in the history of when you were with CLG, but I know that you guys were in the conversation when Hiko and Skadoodle were shopping themselves around. You know, they were going to all the NA orgs, Team Liquid. Obviously, like, Cloud9 wasn't really a destination because Hiko had just come from there. But I remember him telling me that CLG was a team that was an option, and presumably I think this would have been just before you caught Peter, I assume, because otherwise it wouldn't really make as much sense to have JDM and Skadoodle. But okay, yeah. Right? Were they actually willing in that scenario? Would they have paid for Hiko, do you think? Would that have made sense?
Probably not. That's another thing, right? Like I said, they're not going to dish out the money. If they had a competition with Liquid or they had a competition with C9, they would lose that every time. They lost a competition specifically with SCA. I think they were willing to match the price at one point maybe, but Skadoodle decided to go with Cloud9 anyway. So CLG still were able to put out some money, but when it came to competing with Liquid and C9, the players, I don't know if it was necessarily the players that decided, no, I'm going to go to C9 or Liquid, or I don't know. Personally, to me, it looked like the players just wanted to go to C9 and Liquid. Like, because Hiko ended up on Liquid, I think, and then Sky ended up on C9.
Yes.
So that just goes back to what I was saying, where even if the players had considered joining us and CLG put out the money for it, it's still, the players still made decisions to go elsewhere.
Okay, so obviously people will know that you did leave CLG at one point in time. You were in these other teams I referenced before, right? When you came back to CLG, what was the logic in coming back to the team then? Because it sounds like a lot of the issues that you had in the past, probably to some degree, were still present. So why come back to the org?
I had very little to do with the org and just me wanting to win with a good lineup. And at the time, I had a really, really terrible year on CLG statistically and otherwise. I just wasn't even calling on TSM, and I felt like I should have been, and that was the mistake that I made. So going into CLG, I was basically like a worthless player. It's really just that simple. I was worth very little. People thought I was bad. It's just that I'm not a good in-game leader because I lost my rep as an in-game leader because I didn't in-game lead on TSM. So essentially, why would people want me? So I had to kind of reprove myself on this roster of CLG. So I didn't really have options. Like, it had nothing to do with basically I didn't have options. So it came down to me talking to Chet, ImAPet, and I was like, hey man, if you guys are looking for an in-game leader, let me know. And he had known my work ethic from our prior conversations and stuff like that. So he told me that I was part of the discussion when they were looking for players. And I know they were trying to get Daps and Breezy. And then when they didn't, Daps said he wouldn't go without Breezy. Or sorry, Breezy said he wouldn't leave without Daps. Like, he wanted Daps to go with him to join CLG. And so so basically CLG didn't want 2 players. They only wanted 1. So they said no to him. And then I was the next person in line. And Daps even recommended me to CLG. So then I guess I ended up joining CLG. And then, yeah.
Okay, so when you say that part there, that your value was very low, and especially because you'd given up the mantle of being a leader, so it's not like people are like, well, I need a leader, shall I get him? Actually, people probably wondered, can you even lead anymore? Are you going to be any good? Right? A question I have along those lines is, I feel like actually, in a weird way, so obviously CLG was where, in a sense, you turn things around, you establish yourself again, but there is a little niggling detail, right? Which is that I noticed exactly the period when you started getting these upset performances, and you had some good placings in CLG, was also when people became aware of ImAPet being the coach and his analysis stuff, and a lot of people credited that for a lot of the upsets, right? So what's the most reasonable version from you, right? How much did he have to do with your leadership style? How much control did you have as a leader?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. Before we added Rick, we were still mediocre at best. So once we added Rick, and it was me, Rick, and then the other 3, and then ImAPet, I would say a lot of the work, as far as the game plan went, was Chet coming up with putting out a lot of time into demos and stuff like that, but me being able to execute it inside the game. So I would think even he would say that it was a lot of the team efforts. There's a lot of 50-50 between him and I. But I'm not saying that's the only reason we did well. You know what I mean? Like, Rick was an insane player. It was a really good pickup for the price that CLG got him at. And it was I guess it was one of those things where it was just lucky that he was playing terribly on badly on Renegades or struggling or whatever and got cut, because then CLG was able to get him at a really low price. They paid for him. It was cool. And then I think that when our lineup was finally making out those upsets and stuff like that, yeah, I think Chet was credited, but I think the team as a whole, even I felt like I got a lot of credit. Rick felt like he got a lot of credit. I don't think that's what we were worried about. It was more the fact that it was just the downhill turn after those upsets, because my teams have always been known to get these upsets. It wasn't just this version of CLG. It was the old version of CLG. We came from nobody knew who Tarek was, JDM was. No one knew who these guys were. Then we got those upsets. And I know that I got a lot of credit for that. And I got credit this time around. And I feel like I do deserve it. But at the same time, it's my players played really well as well. So, yeah, the only problem was we just weren't able to do it in BO3s. And I just think a lot of it had to do with the inconsistencies in our roster.
Okay. So in the context of how the interview's gone so far and the things you've said about CLG, this also poses a different element to ImAPet leaving, because on one level people could be like, maybe he wanted new adventure, maybe he didn't get along with FNS, whatever. But I mean, I would say, even without knowing, if I just pretend I know nothing, if I say you join Optic, well, they're an org known for paying top dollar. If CLG's an org that doesn't pay that much, was that a factor in him leaving? Did you have any conflict with him in terms of how he wanted to do things, how you wanted to do things?
So after we had the run at Star Ladder and I think at DreamHack Summer, obviously he was a very, at that point, I think I tweeted stuff. A lot of people on our team tweeted that this guy is fucking insane at what he does. He's very good. So he got a lot of credit at that point. Optic organizations wanted him, and I got an offer as well. And, I think Optic at one point offered me, but it wasn't a straight up hey man, we need you to join. It was they considered me almost. Okay. And but they really wanted ImAPet. So I had a conversation with him. He was very open with me about the whole thing. He was like, "Hey man, like let's go outside, let's have a talk." And then we had a conversation about he told me that he got an offer from Optic and he might take it. And I was like, "Dude, go for it." And he's like, "I want to take you with me." So let's put it this way: I've never gotten along with a coach better than ImAPet, in a sense that in and out of game, like out of game we were friends, like really good friends, but in the game we were just always on the same page because we put time together into the game and come up with the game plan. We were usually on the same page, and the way we thought about the game was very similar, which is super important, I think, in why we were successful in the first place. It's like every single time I would have a counter, he would usually have the exact same counter in his head type thing. So our chemistry was really good right from the start, and so he wanted to take me with him to Optic, but I chose not to. I was like, "No, I don't want to go to Optic." Straight up, like I don't want to. And this was after Starlight. I remember specifically Optic asking me if I would even consider joining, and my answer was I would think about it, but my answer was basically no, because I knew that at the end of the day, Optic was like basically going downhill at that point. I think like I don't think they were doing so well.
No, they weren't.
And we were like doing a lot better. So I figured, my team would continue improving. But then when Chet left, I even said this in my tweet longer, I think I should have left as well, because I think a lot of my success attributed to him putting out a lot more work and giving me a lot to work with, giving me a lot of options, giving me a lot of strats, doing well in timeouts, giving me suggestions. And when that went away, it definitely changed the dynamic of the game for us.
So a bizarre element is that it's actually not, I made a video about this, I think it was last year. It's actually not just in CSGO that CLGs had to take the same approach, because there was actually a very weird thing happen in the esports industry where in League of Legends, where once they had been like, one of the absolute biggest teams, because they waited until actually very recently with the whole NALCS and Overwatch League thing where people had to get investors to be able to buy these spots. They were one of the teams that actually didn't take on any investment in what the era we're talking about actually. So they still were running as a business, and didn't have essentially money to play with, thinking, well, you don't have to necessarily do something for a couple of years here. So I know that actually in League of Legends, they also haven't signed like the really big name players for quite a while, unless they were like someone who's a little bit troubled, like Dardoch, for example. So as far as I know, one of the areas I've noticed, right, this is just a general observation, but if a team's ever in a position like that where, the fans still think, well, we're still a huge org, we should have the best players, a way that you can kind of like, it's good PR to make fans not mad when you don't pick up the star players, because, everyone wants you to sign the best player and just be good instantly. What you tell people is, no, what we're doing is we're developing people, okay? We're going to get like a great staff, and we're going to have the team element. And another thing you often do, right, is you put a lot of emphasis on the idea that like, it's not just about having good players, it's about like having players who have the same values as us. You use a lot of this PR talk, right? Even though they said a lot of that stuff, as far as I know, CLG as an org did do quite a lot of restructuring that some of the other orgs maybe only just caught up to now. Like you did get people who were like sort of like sports psychologists and lifestyle coaches and people who would be in the house and work with you. And obviously your team actually having a team house was very different from a lot of CS teams. Did they provide a good infrastructure and these aspects? Like, was it beneficial?
Yep. I would say CLG went all out when it came to making sure that we had like a sports psychologist, like you said, a gaming house, everything we needed, basically we had, except for the players. They would put out money for everything. I believe that when people say they want to develop talent, that usually just means it's an excuse that, well, we don't have money. We're not trying to buy out players. It's what we're trying to say to you. And the reason for that is very obvious. They don't want to put out the money. It's okay to do that. Like, it's okay to say that. I understood that right from the start. I knew joining the CLG roster that was more to prove myself than for me to try to like necessarily win a championship. But when I saw the potential of this roster, and I saw the infrastructure that was put in with ImAPet already, when him and I worked together, it was really well. It was done really well, and CLG gave us everything we needed to do well. The only problem was, I also don't delude myself into thinking, oh yeah, I could win a championship with this roster just because we did well at Starlight or just because we did well at DreamHack Summer. A lot of it had to do with me and Chet had a conversation right after Summer, and we're like, dude, like this person needs to get cut. I don't think we could win with that with this person. Like if we got this guy instead, we could win. We had this conversation. We go to the org. We're like, hey man, is there any way to make these changes? The org asks, the team, at the time we wanted Yell from LG. Okay. So we ask him, like, hey man, like, is it possible to get Yell instant? Like, there's no chance, because the buyouts are insane, right? Which is fair, whatever. Like, if you have a star player, you want to keep him. But regardless, even if CLG had the money, I don't think they would have put out the money to get Yell unless he was like 10 or 20K. So at the end of the day, I think Chet realized very, very quickly, especially after the minor, and I think he pointed this out in I don't know where he said this, but he told me this multiple times that he just felt like there was no hope. Like even after we did well, he knew that we were never going to get past that. That was the peak of our team right there. We were never going to win a title.
Sure.
And I agreed with him, but I didn't also want to leave this team without an in-game leader and a coach. Like it was shitty. And at the end we just stuck around and got Ryu and stuff, and then it just failed.
Okay, so along those lines then, right, another thing that they, again, just publicly communicated from CLG was, I remember after Star Series was when that guy who, I think his title was COO, I forget, it's the guy who's alias with N.
Esports director,
right.
Matt?
Okay. Yes. I think, no, it wasn't Matt, it was the other guy. It was like, it was a guy, I think his alias began with N. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Devin, maybe? It's either Devin, who's the CEO.
Oh, maybe it is Matt then, right? Okay, we'll just
and
take
Trinity? Are you talking about the alias Trinity?
That might be it then. Okay, maybe I was wrong. But it was a guy who was one of the head people, okay, and he did a blog after that tournament. And in the blog, he said something along the lines of like, he actually expected you could have gone further at Star Series, whereas, in the context of Counter-Strike and where your team was, that was like about the best you could hope for. I mean, you had to beat like Gambit on Cobblestone and stuff. This is all just to get to the playoffs, and then you played the best team in the world. So no one else realistically expected like you should have done more. Everyone else was like, great first step. Maybe you can build on that, right? Was there a degree to which that's just PR? And again, he knew how to like sell it to the public. Like, this team's got a lot of potential.
Oh,
do you think CLG, the org, did they actually really believe that your team was going to do all these great things and that just giving you the infrastructure was enough?
I don't think so. I can't believe that. I can't believe that they thought that we were good enough to be able to win a championship. I didn't believe it. And I was the in-game leader of the team. I don't know how they would. So, and I was pretty transparent about that with the org. And I said, like, we're going to need better pieces in order to be more consistent lineup. And consistency is the only thing that matters in Counter-Strike. Like, if you are going to do well at one event and then make a semifinal and then bomb out at the next event and then bomb out at the next two and then make another semifinal, that's not good. Like, you're not a good team at that point. At least not a top 5 team. And so, to me, no, I don't think that they believed this. I think it was more of like a media thing to like just show the fans that we weren't satisfied. I think that's what the whole the post was about, and I do agree with that part. Like I said it straight up. Like right after we did what we did at Star Series, I told my teammates and I told Chet and I told everyone, even the org, that like I'm not happy with this result. Like I'm happy that we're doing well, but I'm definitely like I don't want to just do this. I want to be able to win because I genuinely believe that with the right pieces we could win. And that's when Chet and I started talking about who we could get and who were the potential players that would take us to the next level. And I think that's what other organizations have done well. Optic is the one that comes to mind of an organization that is willing to, or even Cloud9 now, they got Russian Tarek. Like you have to make changes in order to improve. And sure. CLG, for example, right now felt that I was the change needed to improve for them. With I don't know who they're going to get from me, but that's what they believe, genuinely believe, is that I'm the replacement that's going to make them better, which is fair, but whatever. The point is, I think that at the time when Chet and I talked about it, it was definitely like we definitely felt like we needed 2 changes in order to improve. Okay.
Like, can you give us kind of some context on like the scale to which it's difficult if you're in a team like CLG at that point in time to ever like improve players, basically? Because I mean, there's a lot of factors, right? Like, it's not just like the buyout's a factor, but even in a world, for example, where say you just waited till someone's contract ended, you have to be able to offer them a salary that's good enough, right? Then on top of that, hopefully you're going to have, I mean, you got some results. You have some results. Oftentimes you need star players as well, right? NA it's very, I mean, they're not the most complicated players when it comes to what factors are going to make them decide to join a team, right? Was there really, like, what kind of people realistically could even have been? Like, would you have had to recruit premier players or something? Would it just been the very bottom of invite? Was there any possibility to ever get like a big name?
Like I said, when we did well at Star Series, that was the only time I think in CLG's entire history that anybody wanted to join us. Any top player would ever want to join us. Because like I told you before, that's been the biggest problem on CLG. It's not necessarily just the fact that the org won't put out the money. It's that even if they do, players still pick other organizations over CLG because of the past and the fact that we were an inconsistent roster, and then they feel like they have more talent elsewhere, like C9 and Liquid. So we always had to compete with C9 and Liquid in that sense. But that was the first time in a while after doing well at Star Series and even at DreamHack Summer where maybe players felt like, hey, like I want to join CLG. So that's why Chet and I had those conversations, because we felt like, oh my God, this is the only time where we'll ever be able to get players that are like decent enough and will join, even if their salary isn't so great. So it's definitely difficult though. Like if you're a CLG player, it's really, 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 really hard to get a player, any player that's good.
Okay. So as I referenced before, your team was one of the teams that actually from the early days even had like a team house where you were all living there, right? In that setting, I know in NA, actually teams have been a lot more open to this. Like I know Cloud9, a bunch of them lived in a house at one point in time. I think some of the Optic players did, or maybe they just visited for boot camps, right? I know in general it's more of a European thing where like just people are totally against the idea that they don't want to be in a team house. They want to stay at home with their family and then just travel, right? What is your actual take on that? Like overall, is it fine to be in a team house? Would you rather not be? What's your take after having actually experienced it?
So me specifically, and I think I've been in a team house longer than literally anyone, because I started in a gaming house, and then on TSM I was in a gaming house, and then on CLG this time around I was in a gaming house. So I can specifically say that the only way a gaming house will ever work consistently and it'll be like do well for a team is if you have an office like 10 minutes away or something. That's where you play, and the house is where you just live.
Okay.
Like that's the only time I think that a gaming house works, and we had that on TSM. And I think that like helped us a lot more than like just having a gaming house where you wake up, you go shower, brush your teeth, whatever, and then you walk over to your computer, and now you have to see all your teammates and stuff, and you play. I think it's way better to not have a gaming house or just to have a gaming house in an office. And I think that was CLG's original plan before they dropped the team, was to do that anyway, was to like move to, I don't know where, somewhere in LA where they basically have an office, and then so it's like you're separating work from play or work from family or whatever. So yeah, but to me, I don't think the gaming houses are necessary at all. I think that it's fine to boot camp every now and then, and especially like to boot camp in Europe, I think that's even more important. But I don't think gaming houses are necessary. I made that pretty clear to CLG too.
Okay. If in the context of when you rejoined CLG, you said your own value was very low, another player whose value was in a terrible position was Cutler, because actually, like, his time trying to be the in-game leader wasn't very good. Obviously, that was like some of the worst period of time in terms of the results. As an individual player, I mean, I think he even has said it himself many times. He was in a very bad spot, I don't think any team wanted him at that point in time, right?
Yep.
He looked to have an improvement in form when you made this lineup that you had these results with. What was the concept on how to use Cutler, and what was strengths and weaknesses in this edition?
I just think Cutler is the type of player that, as good as he is, he just doesn't do more than he needs to. He's afraid to make a play sometimes because he feels like, oh, it's not, I'll lose the round because of it. That's the way that I feel like that's the way he thinks. And so a lot of the times I would just put him in positions where he would have to make a play. And I just felt like I knew how to use him. I think maybe better than other in-game leaders he's had in the past. And I think without micromanagement, Cutler is not necessarily the best player to have on your team, but if you micromanage him well, he's able to get the kills that he needs to get. It's really just that simple. And he's a good piece to have in terms of if you want him to do like the really, really support stuff and like basically we call it bitch roles. Like
sure.
He's the player you want on your team to have that. He's basically like, he's not as good as Xyp9x, I don't think, but he's definitely willing to do all of Xyp9x's roles, and he would do like any role basically that you'd ask him to do, and he's a very, very good teammate. I think that's his biggest asset, is the fact that he's a very good teammate. He'll throw any flash you want. He'll b-hop with a knife out anywhere just to bait shots of the enemy just so you'd get the kill, So in that sense, Cutler was very useful. But so he was used to that role. So when I think when I came in, I put him more in a role where, dude, you can be useful. Like, stop just b-hopping around and dying. Like you're not doing any damage. So what I noticed is that's what he was doing at the start. And so me and Chet put him in a position where he became a lot more passive. Like I started making him a lot more passive and like a lot less. Basically, I made him more into a playmaker than anything else, I think. And that's what I did on the old version of CLG as well. I think that's why he succeeded under me and Chet. But yeah, I think he's a good player to have, but only under the right leadership. I don't think he's a good player to have otherwise. And I don't think he's definitely necessarily the player that you want on your team if you're going to be a consistent top 5 team.
Because you two are the only two that are the holdovers from the original CLG CSGO lineup, right? From the outside, people might assume, oh, maybe you guys are just really good friends or there's some special bond there. Was there?
Between Cutler and I mean, we were never really that close in terms of like, I don't know. I mean, we were close friends, but it wasn't like anything special. I don't know. It was just like we were just chill with each other. We would never like really fight or argue with each other. I would say something to him, he'd do it. Sometimes we would like have like we'd bicker, but I don't know. I don't think that there was anything more than what you see, really.
Okay. So Kuster has obviously had a pretty tortured up and down couple of years, considering he's still very young in his career, because he had the whole thing where he was like considered one of the breakout rookies when he was on NME, and then obviously he just his value got completely rinsed out by being on Liquid, where it went so terribly, and then everyone was kind of like dropped off the hype train. And then when he actually started to play well again in CLG was the time when they had the really bad lineup, and you know all hope was lost, and Tarek was just waiting to get out of the team. Right? What's your conception of who is Kuster as a player? Like, what type of player is he? What should he be used for?
I just want to start off by saying he has an insanely high skill ceiling, but for someone who has such a high skill ceiling, I've never seen lower confidence.
Okay.
He consistently gets in his own head, I think, and he's admitted this multiple times where he just feels like he's scared to make a play. And a lot of the times he would just like let Rick op. As an opper, I don't know if you've ever like. I'm sure you've interviewed operas, spoken to operas before, like Guardian or Kenny S or something. They're not just gonna give up the op to like.
Yes.
Kenny S is just gonna give the op to Apex. He's gonna use it. Why? Because he's confident. He knows he's insane, and Kenny doesn't know that. Like Kenny, a lot of the times will just give up and like be like, "Yeah, Rick, just op, dude. I'm just gonna AK. I can't." And there are times where operas aren't feeling it, and they'll do that. Like Ska, a lot of the times will just give the op to Tarek or something, if like or Stu. Okay. And that's fine to do that. But like. Kenny did it more times, I think, than anybody. And I've talked to Chet about this so much because I felt like Kenny had the potential to be the best player, like best opera in North America, if he just had confidence. And he just doesn't have any confidence in himself. Like he always seems to get in his own head. He's the opera in a 12-12 situation that won't make a play for you because he just feels like if he dies, he'll lose you the round. So that's what he's thinking going into the round, it feels like. So a lot of the times what I would do is be like, yo, Kenny, go for this pick. Yo, Kenny, do this. Kenny, do that. Not necessarily micromanaging, but just giving him some direction. So that way I would take the responsibility if he died. And I felt like he wasn't able to do that all himself. And maybe I spoiled him in that way in the sense that like I said that stuff to him so much that he felt like he couldn't make a play on his own. But we talked about that as well and we tried to fix it. But it's just not something that can be fixed. I don't think someone's mental state and the way they are as people can necessarily like if you've been
it's a bigger problem than Counter-Strike, isn't it? That's the problem.
Yeah, no, exactly. If you've been a certain way for 22 years, 23 years of your life, I'm not going to change you as a human. So like at the end of the day, it came down to a lot of like who he was as a person and just how like his lack of confidence, I think, is what's always held him back from doing well.
Because this was always one of the things as an outsider that I always wondered about that lineup was like, obviously Ricky can op. We've seen him do it in a bunch of the other teams. But if you look at his skill set, logically, you would even probably want him to be like the secondary op or the hybrid player, you know, and just do it from time to time. So how was his role in the team? Because it sounds like sometimes he just got made to be the opper.
Well, Rick would just get annoyed and he'd be like, fuck this, I'm opping. Like a lot of the times it came down to Rick just being annoyed, especially in the latter days before like the last 2 months, especially, it's just Rick being annoyed the whole time. He's like, Kenny's not making any plays. Kenny's not doing this. Kenny's not doing that. Like, I want to do this shit if he's not going to do it. Like, why is our opera sitting here in window just hiding the entire round? Not, you know what I mean? Like, that's the Rick's mentality was, because Rick is the opposite mentality wise than Kenny. Rick is, dude, they're shit. Let's just kill them. Like, he's a very confident player. Let's put it that way. Like, Rick is probably the one of, if not the most confident player I've ever played with. So. In his head, he just was confused as to why Kenny would a lot of the times be passive when he should have been aggressive, or vice versa. And so a lot of the times he'd pick up the op out of frustration. But when Chet was around, we made it so that we would sometimes double op on T side and just have Rick op as well. And Rick was a lot more satisfied with that. Like he was okay with that completely.
Did he have like a chip on his shoulder because he got kicked out of Renegades?
I don't think so, honestly. I don't know. I never felt like he never necessarily even talked about that stuff. I mean, he told us what happened and stuff, but he just felt like he had talent and he just had to prove himself on CLG. And I think that's exactly what he ended up doing. And he was just super confident, and Renegades didn't like that. The fact, not necessarily the fact that he was confident, but just I don't think he expressed how he felt in like the appropriate way. So I think he was like a little rude when he didn't need to be and stuff, just to be honest. And it ended up like costing him his spot on Renegades. And essentially, I think on CLG, sometimes he would say something in a certain way, but then he told us what he learned from Renegades is the fact that like sometimes he says something and doesn't realize how he said it, and then so we told him like, dude, like, or sometimes he'll like randomly type question. Like we had a troll about this because he'd randomly type question marks or smiley faces when we'd lose a dumb round.
Just passive aggressive,
yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were like, dude, shut the fuck up. Like, stop doing that. It's really annoying. And then so he's like, thank you. Like, tell me to shut up if I'm doing annoying shit. It's really that simple. So he's a very reasonable dude. It's really just that simple. Like if he thinks you're doing something wrong, he'll just tell you. And so I appreciate that about him, and also the fact that he's just a very confident player, and he's basically willing to do any role that he needs to do as long as we win. And he made it clear like a million times that he doesn't care about stats. He just really just wants to win. So
okay. So bizarrely in your team, I actually still think to this day that Ethan's name, probably of everyone's name, is probably still not like the least famous. It seems like it's never really popped off as much. I mean, admittedly, he hasn't been in any super good team aside from this lineup ever, and he's obviously had, you know, some games that were very good, but famously, I feel like actually people like him have a tougher road to the top, because if you're really good online in the early days, you always have to like doubly prove it online and like really show you're one of the best. Otherwise, people always want to kind of hate on you because they remember when you used to wreck them in online scrims or some EPL game, you know.
Yeah.
Like, who is Ethan? Because he seems like there's certainly skill there, but he also seems like kind of a quiet guy.
Ethan is the best player on CLG, and it's not even close. Like, he has a good mentality for the game. He understands the game really well. He listens to strats really well. He communicates really well. He sometimes even makes random mid-round calls for how young he is. It's really good. He watches demos, you know, trying to learn how to play the game. Good teammate outside of the game, not annoying at all, nothing, just a very chill kid. Never really argues with anybody. If you say he did something wrong, he'll accept it. He'll learn from it. And more importantly than all of that stuff, he has ridiculous potential. Like, the kid has really, really insane aim. And I don't normally say this shit about people. Like, I would say, I don't know, give him like, he'll prove it. Regardless of like, I don't know how long it'll take, but he'll eventually prove that he's one of the best in North America. There's no doubt in that. But
like, Ethan's a better aimer than Tarek?
I wouldn't. Yeah, I think he's got the same aim as Tarek. Like, it's the same shit. It's like I can't really say better or worse because it just depends on the day, you know. But I think both of them can out aim each other on any given day. Okay. But I would say he has the same potential I saw in Tarek, without a doubt. Like, the way Tarek was, and even now that Tarek's in-game leading, like, everyone thought Tarek was an idiot, right? Like, because of that meme about him being a peanut butter. Like, everyone's like, wow, this guy's stupid. Now he's in-game leading the best team in North America. So obviously that they were wrong. These are players that I've played with, and I know what I'm talking about when I say that this guy will end up being exactly like Tarek, if not better than Tarek. Like, he has so much potential, and it sucks that, you know, he's, like you said, he's not as recognized, I guess, on CLG as some of the other players, but I know that he will be eventually.
Okay. One thing I wanted to know is when you were describing, like, not just the skill set, but I like the way you actually tied it into the personality of the players as well, because obviously your mindset absolutely decides how much of your potential you can unleash. You know, if you've got a terrible mindset, it's going to limit you, as you can see with certain members we've listed. Yeah. Like, one thing I always feel like you need a really good balance with that's underrated in teams is, like, ideally you need to, like, have counterbalancing aspects to different elements. So, for example, you don't want everyone in the team to be like super aggro and want to do all plays everywhere all over them. That just in game wouldn't work. And in personalities, you're going to have conflict all the time. At the same time, you obviously can't have players who are only passive in the game, no playmakers, you know, good players, but no one will do anything. And likewise, you can't have personalities that are all just like, oh, I guess we're okay. You know, maybe that was a good result. You know, you want some people who are fiery, some people that can balance out the other people, right? It does sound, when you described people initially here, like maybe you had too many of the kind of more like people who lack confidence or don't necessarily know how good they are.
Well, there were only two that I really wanted to replace, and I already made this pretty clear that I wanted Cutler and Kenny replaced, and not because they're bad players, but there are things about those players that limit them from going further in their careers. For Kenny, it's his mentality, and for Cutler, to me, it felt like a lot of it just had to do with he had peaked as a player, I think, and a lot of it also had to do with the fact that, like, he's just very inconsistent now. And so those two players I wanted gone for those reasons, whereas I felt like Ethan is an all-arounder and Rick was an all-rounder. Both of them had really good confidence. So if Kenny didn't have confidence issues, I would want Kenny on the team too. But those are the two players that I wanted to replace for those reasons. And that doesn't mean I'm saying Cutler is bad or Kenny is bad, you know, but I completely agree with you in a sense that you can't have a player that's too passive. You can't have a player that's too aggressive. You have to be able to do everything in Counter-Strike to be a top team. All 5 players on your team need to be able to be do anything basically, and not necessarily better than the other player on your team.
Sure.
For example, in opping, but you have to know how to shoot the gun and how to place yourself at angles and stuff. The best way to describe it is look at SK, for example. If you threw an op in Taco's hands, and a lot of times I think it's Cobble. He plays with an op on B side on Cobble. They do that because they have setups for it, and he's able to wield the gun and use it in the right way without. And it's not, you're not going to see him get a 4K or something, but you'll see him do enough with that gun. And I just feel like that's at the end of the day what makes a team the best team in the world. And teams like Astralis, when you look at all 5 players and you don't see somebody who's wow, this guy doesn't know how to do this, or this guy's way too passive, he'll never change. When you see something like that, you already feel wow, this guy's already capped. He's not going to get better. Whereas if you look at a team like C9, I would say that has the most potential in NA right now. When you look at every player on C9, you could feel wow, this guy has so much room to grow. And I felt like the 2 players in my team that didn't have room to grow anymore were Cutler and Kenny.
Okay.
And I just seen so much evidence of it throughout the year that's why I wanted to make those decisions.
So as you referenced, it's not even just that. I mean, the timing of them removing you was kind of weird because they removed you and then the whole CS all just shut down. So it's to a lot of people, that may if I had to speculate from the outside, that sounds like they did just want to make that roster move, and then afterwards CLG just decided actually let's just shut this whole thing down entirely. What happened internally?
So obviously we did make EPL, and by the way, we had a 98% chance of making EPL, and when we lost to Complexity and to the Splice in 2 games straight, and then
the Hillary Clinton of CS:GO. Okay,
dude, it was pretty bad. And then so we were just okay, I don't know. I already knew I wanted to leave the team 2 months ago. I think I made that pretty clear in my tweet longer, but I wanted to leave the team 2 months ago, but I didn't want to leave the team just without an in-game leader. And so I was you know what, when the season ends, I'm going to leave. That dropped my motivation a lot, but I still put in time. But I just felt like I was playing like shit. I was playing like shit. It was just that simple. So when they approached me, or rather when Ryu approached me and the players approached me, and we had this meeting or whatever, and the players were basically if there's, Ryu asked them all, hey man, if there's one person, who would you replace? If there's one person that you had to replace on this lineup, who would it be? And all of them said me, basically. And all of them made it very clear that none of this was my fault, but they just felt like replacing me and getting a better player and having someone else in game lead would make them better. Fair argument, whatever. I was okay with it. I was going to leave regardless, so it didn't matter to me.
It's very much an NA argument, though, right? A lot of teams have done that in NA. They all, it does feel like a lot of them think one of us can in-game lead, and if someone flags better, then we win, right?
And that, and also the fact that when you see a player like Tarek in-game leading, or Nitro now in-game leading, you're oh my god, any of us could do it, really. It shouldn't be that impossible. As long as we have enough skill, we should be able to win. So I think that's what they were going with, which is whatever. I was okay with it. I didn't even argue it. I was going to go anyway. And then I guess what was funny was a month ago I asked Nick Allen, I don't know what his title is. He's the middleman between CLG and MSG.
Ah, right, yeah.
So he's the middleman, and so he's the guy that so he's the middleman. So basically he came over to our house to introduce himself, blah, 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 and kind of to ask us about the team, how we're doing, all that stuff. And this was about a month, maybe a little bit longer, more than a month ago. He came to our house and he's like, hey, so how you guys doing, blah, blah, blah. So I asked straight up, I'm like, so are you guys going to drop us? Do you have any plans of dropping us or any other team in the organization? And he was like, nah, there's no plan to do that. So it was weird to me when this team got dropped, but obviously I wasn't on the roster anymore. Unofficially, I wasn't even on the roster anymore, so it didn't really affect me that much that CLG got dropped. But it was just weird that they dropped CLG after saying that they wouldn't drop CLG, the CS:GO team.
What do you think in let's say 2017? What's 2017 FNS like as a leader? What do you think your style is? What are your strengths?
I would say that what I learned from TSM was that I need to lead. It's really just that simple. I feel like I do it better than anyone that I've played with ever. So as in terms of strengths, I just know how to use my teammates. I recognize the strengths and weaknesses of my teammates. I know how to use them, and I feel like I know how to adapt well. And overall, I feel like I'm pretty good at calling, especially in pretty high pressure situations. I'm not afraid to make a call in high pressure situations, and I'm also not afraid to ask for help. So a lot of the times, if I feel like I'm not 95% confident in a call that I'm making, or at least 90% confident, I'll just let somebody else make the call. Or I'll be like, guys, I don't know what to do, and we'll time out, and Chet will give me a suggestion. So stuff like that, basically.
So as you referenced before, there was at least a possibility you could have been on Optic this year. Obviously, when Stanislaw left, they clearly needed an in-game lead. I mean, at one point in time, Hayes was even having to do it. He was technically the coach. It wasn't even a pro player anymore. And then obviously, I mean, as we said, Hayes was in the org. Tarek was one of the star players. You know, they had people who had connections to you, right? Beyond that, has there never been a time where, for example, like a Team Liquid or a Cloud9, you know, these teams at times have needed in-game leaders. Have they never wanted you? I mean, I remember before they made the most recent Cloud9 move, they had still had a pretty decent lineup of players. They just didn't have the clear sort of like traditional in-game leader. I even made a video on this topic. I thought, why doesn't a team like this consider you? Do you feel like you're undervalued in the community?
I'll say, by the way, no, I have never gotten an offer from Liquid or C9, but I will say that it's kind of shitty when you're the stepping stone in-game leader.
Yes, and
without
you're
a
the one
doubt.
who never moves on, but the star players move on.
Right, and I'm kind of over that. So as far as my next move goes, I really don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to sit there and develop talent anymore and just have players move on and then basically have to consistently reinvent myself as an in-game leader and also reprove myself because my teams just start doing really shitty at the end of the year. I don't want to do that anymore. So I want to be able to get my skill up. I want to be able to play a lot of my plan is to basically play a shit ton of CS, improve as a player, understand where my weaknesses are. But it's basically mechanical skill. Like I just need to improve as a player, and maybe if I'm lucky enough that somebody gives me a chance enough to to where I'm able to prove myself, not just as an in-game leader, but as I can be a good player. And I that's the plan at least. But as far as I do think that it was shitty that I've never had the right. If I just had 4 insane, if I was in Kerrigan's shoes, dude, that's perfect.
That's the dream, right?
Yeah, every time I just say that every time, and I think Kerrigan's an insane in-game leader, and it's great that he got that chance. But it's any in-game leader wants that, man. Any in-game leader wants to be on a C9 or a Liquid. You give me those pieces, and I will win. But I need those pieces, and I don't think I've ever had those right pieces, and that's why I tried so hard to make changes on CLG. Chet tried so hard to make changes on CLG, but it just wasn't going to happen.
Okay. When I ask you this question, right, it's more of an abstract question about how NA thinks about in-game leaders. I will add the caveat at the beginning that obviously, first of all, it's a loaded question and it's impossible to be totally unbiased when you answer it because it's sort of like me asking a beer manufacturer, do you think more people should drink beer? No matter how honest they are, there's going to be an element of bias, right? So when I ask you this, okay, I've noticed over the last couple of years that basically, unless you're Sean Gares or very brief period of time Stanislaw, as we saw, NA doesn't really seem to actually care about anyone who's an in-game leader. Not just a guy doing in-game leading for a month, a guy who says, my career now is I'm an in-game leader, right? Whereas actually, you look at Europe, yes, there's definitely players in Europe who might not have been the most traditional in-game leaders, but when they say in NA, okay, because I've had these conversations with a lot of top NA players, and if I say to them, why don't you guys have an in-game leader? They'll just say there are none. And I'll go, well, I mean, I know FNS, I know DAPS. They'll be like, nah, those guys suck. And I always tell these guys, do you think MSL and Zeus are some insane players? Have I missed something? These guys aren't good fraggers, but there's a reason why some of the best teams in the world never even consider removing these guys in game. They want those guys, and they're like, that's not where the problem is, them not fragging. What is it with NA teams? Why do they generally not really, why can you not be, in theory, not a skilled in-game leader in an NA team? Why are you not allowed to do that?
I don't know. I honestly have no clue. I don't know why, but I'm sure they have their reasons. But the truth actually is just the fact that I don't know. I feel like I've proven enough to where even with the pieces I've consistently had, and they have never been the best pieces in NA compared to what Sean has had. Especially Sean, I guess, is the best person to describe because he's always had insane talent on his rosters. Yes. I've never had that, and I've still done damage internationally. So imagine what I could do if I did have that talent is the best thing I can say. And I've never been able to prove that because I've never had the chance to join those types of teams. Now, if I did ever get that chance and I failed, by all means, cut me, get rid of me, shun me, whatever the fuck. But I've never once gotten the chance, for example, that Sean Gares has gotten. And by the way, deservingly, I'm not saying that Sean doesn't deserve that shit. But it just sucks that I haven't because I feel like I've proven a lot more with a lot less to work with.
So I had a couple of other questions, right, that aren't technically related to CLG or your time there, but one is tenuously connected. So I'll use that to segue in, okay? So obviously, you played with JDM, in arguably his peak. I mean, people forget this. He legitimately used to be right there with Skadoodle, and it wasn't even just him and Skadoodle. It was like, they are some of the best AWPers in the world. You know, it wasn't that whole like best NA player at their role, which sadly is what, you know, in many cases is the terminology people use now, because you can't really compare a lot of the players just in terms of the results to the top Europeans, right?
Yeah.
What would your outside speculation be, or as someone who knew him and used him as a player in the past, why do you think he struggled so much on Liquid? Because even when, for example, like he's had some amazing series recently against SK Gaming, but somehow you look at the end of the tournament, the numbers are never that insane. You know, he has the games where, like famously on Overpass, you know, just nothing will happen sometimes. What's your take on JDM and his recent struggles, and just ever since he left CLG, basically, he's never seemed like quite the same player?
I don't necessarily agree that he's never seemed. I think he's shown signs of random, like there's been events where he has done really well. I think at least some games, but that's the one thing I will disagree with you on. But other than that, yeah, I would say that he had a lot more. The reason I think that he looked more insane on CLG is because he had worse teammates. It's really just that simple. Like he had less skilled teammates, and my playstyle, my operas have always succeeded. Or in my leadership, and the reason for that is I always put my operas. That's the one thing I make sure I do, is put my operas in their most comfortable positions and micromanage them to the best that I know how. And I'm not saying I'm the reason why JDM did well, but I just feel like in my team, I make sure that the opera is the most comfortable, and maybe that had something to do with it. But also the fact that he had less skilled teammates, which allowed him to get way more kills. And maybe just he knew in the back of his mind, even subconsciously, that he had to do well. Whereas on Liquid, he has a lot, like it's shared now. He has so much more talent. Like Alicia and Twist are far and away the two best players on Liquid. So at the end of the day, like how many kills will you end up getting, even if your team wins? And then when your team loses, like I'm not necessarily, like I haven't watched too much of Liquid, so I'm not really sure why, but if I were to guess, a lot of it might have to do with something to do with in-game leading. It might have something to do with his confidence, something like. But the thing is, Josh has never lacked on confidence. Like that's the one thing I can say about him. He's never lacked on confidence. He's ready to go for any peak. He could be 0-10 and he's still playing the same. You know, he's a very methodical player, and he's a lot smarter than people think. Like, you know what I mean? So it was the same thing with Tarek. Like people think, oh, he's dumb. Like he's not. He's a very smart opper. It takes intelligent peaks, all that stuff. But I think the only reason oppers in general succeed on my rosters is because I make sure that they succeed. It's really just that simple. I put them in the right spots. I put them in spots where no matter what ends up happening, they're going to be put in after plant positions on T side. They're going to be, They're not going to be literally entering with an op. At no point are they in too much danger. And then on CT side, I make sure that I move them around a lot. Like sometimes I'll be like, I'll give you an example of Kenny. Like sometimes I'm like, Kenny, can you just push door? We're going to do Shroud Boost or something. And sometimes you need that one kill as an opper to get yourself going. And especially when somebody tells you what to do and then you fail, you'll blame that person, right? Like it's easier to be like, oh, that wasn't my fault. And I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay taking that responsibility and being like, yeah, whatever, I made you do that. But a lot of the times, at least somebody's like Kenny, he won't necessarily, unless he's 20-5, he won't necessarily make this decision for himself because I think he's afraid of dying. And I don't think Josh is like that. So it was a lot easier playing with Josh just in that sense. Is like he would make plays for himself, but he was also allow me to, tell him where to go and stuff.
When he was in CLG, was he like a force flopper? Did he demand the AWP? Was he like, like put me in the best spots, give me everything I want,
Oh well, he would definitely demand the AWP. I don't think he'd care what spots he would play, but he would get frustrated if like he's playing A on Cobble, for example, and they're hitting B every round. He would just be like, I feel useless. Let me go B. But I would already make that change way before he would like complain about it. But he definitely always wanted the AWP. Like he was very like just save guys, drop me an AWP, like make sure. That's the one thing we always troll him about because like he always needed the AWP. But I mean he's good with it, so yeah.
Okay. Right. As his ex-in-game leader, what do you think on the topic? I mean, I once made a video on this. He wasn't a fan of it. I've actually squashed my whole beef with him. We're fine. It's all great. He wasn't a fan, though, of me saying that his rifles were terrible and that he basically only had the AWP. Because if you ever looked at the stats at the time, is what I based the video off, he had like an outrageously low number of like M4 kills, and yet he had a lot of like 5-7 kills, like UMP before it was cool to use it, so it was obvious he just actually was actively not using the rifles most of the time, even when maybe you could have force bought. What do you think of his rifles?
I think they've improved. I really do. I've seen recent matches of Liquid, and I've seen matches on LAN specifically where the dude just gets rifle kills. And I'm always like, it's funny to see him with a rifle. So I'm always like, oh my God, Josh is owning with the AK or like an M4 or whatever. Like, because he always has the op, right? He always demands the op, and it's fair for an opper to do that. And that shows that your opper is confident in himself, which I appreciate. Like, it's good, but I think he has improved with the rifles. Like, there's no doubt. And he DMs a lot. So, like, he deathmatches a shit ton. He at least tries to improve. Like, for example, right now, if you were to tell me, like, your stats suck, I'd be like, yeah, fuck yeah, they do. You're right. Like, I'm not going to deny it. But like I told you, like, what I want to do for next year, at least, is, like, make sure that there's no reason why a team doesn't want me. I don't want a team to have a reason why, like, to not have me. So I'm going to work on my mechanical skill and just, like, make sure that I'm also not just be hopping out and, like, basically doing what Cutler was doing towards the end of the year and just wasting myself, which is I feel like a lot of the times I don't even get a chance to shoot because of the positions I put myself in. And so definitely going to change that and just change a lot of the way that I play and improve, basically.
Okay, so one other thing I wanted to ask you about was, now that we've had some time since that whole incident at DreamHack Denver with KNG and the Immortals players, now that, like, in theory, I haven't spoken to them, so I don't know, but I would hope now enough time's passed that everyone's calmed down, you know, everyone's not so emotional. Obviously, the consequences of all that are fully played out, you know. In theory, we can all move on now, right? When you look back on that whole incident now, right, I actually, like, my outsider perspective is, I think if anything, I realize you're Canadian and there's the whole, like, meme that you all, like, apologize for everything and stuff, but I felt like the fact that they kept going so far, like, disproportionate to what had happened, meant that you kind of were trying to compromise by being like, actually, I apologize for the joke and all, you know. Was it really that bad, the tweet you made? Like, it wasn't all that a bit ridiculous?
Bro, I say it all the time. I thought it was insane that it got so much attention, first of all, but it was insane the way he reacted. It was insane. Like, but the only defense I have for him is that he doesn't know me as a person. Sure. So if somebody doesn't know you and you see that type of tweet, or you don't know someone, you see someone tweet that like that about you, you clearly think they're going to slander you, right? But again, he could have handled it in a million other ways, man. Like, and then after I apologize, I feel like that should be it. That's the thing. Like, that's what I felt like. Once I apologized, I said, I'm sorry, like, I didn't mean to do that. He still didn't believe me. He, like, genuinely believed that I tried to slander them, and that was the end of it. And that's where I think they messed up, is like that, or he messed up, is KNG I'm talking about. He messed up in the sense that, like, even after I apologized, he didn't accept my apology. He didn't try to even have a conversation with me. When I asked Zach specifically, I was like, yo, Zach, like, I'm ready to talk to this guy. Like, and Zach's like, nah, dude, trust me. That's, like, the last thing you want to do. So at that point, it's like, you can't, there's nothing more that I could have done to try to diffuse the situation there. And I knew that I was responsible for the tweet. I took responsibility for it. There was no, like, I wasn't trying to hide from it. I wasn't even trying to hide from him. Yet, like, it just kept escalating, and it just kind of just got annoying at that point. So I just, like, tried to remove myself from it. Okay.
Right, at the end of this interview then, do you have like a fight? Like, it sounds like, I noticed you've been dropping hints throughout the interview, right? Obviously no one knows where you're going as your next team, and no one knows what's next for FNS. It sounds like you're doing a good job of sort of sowing the seeds. If any teams are listening, any orgs, any players, like, this is the sort of person I am, this is what I'd like to do. Right, what final message do you have for people? And within that, do you have anyone you want to thank or say hello to?
Well, first of all, I obviously want to thank, as much as I feel like I shit on them, I do want to thank CLG, because they did employ me twice, you know, and there were things that I did wrong in the organization as well. I'm not a perfect human. There were things that I did that they could probably be like, hey, he was this type of person. And I want to thank all my teammates in my past that, like, I feel like I've improved tremendously, even players on TSM, which wasn't a good year for me, but all those people that have, like, attributed to, like, any type of success that I've had in CS. And what I do want to say, as far as, like, myself, I'm definitely not, like, the perfect caller, I don't think. And I don't think I'm, like, the perfect player by any means, but I try to improve every single day. And I try to, I don't know. I guess the best way to put this is, I'm not as shitty as other people think that I am.
Okay. That's one way to say it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not as shitty as other people think I am. And the truth is, like, the last 2 months of CLG do not, I guess it shouldn't be like, it shouldn't be all people see, you know what I mean? And hopefully that's not all people see, and hopefully that's not what other players see and stuff like that. And I've gotten good comments. I've gotten good, like, a lot of support after, like, you know, basically being essentially removed from CLG. So I want to thank all those people as well. And hopefully I end up back on my feet. That's it.
Hey guys, FNS here. Just a friendly Canadian reminder to keep force spying, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube.